Good day, everyone. I need that one. Thank you. Thank you. Man, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for letting me stand on this audience and bother you for a bit. We've seen some great talks this morning. I was at Ruben's talk on greenhouse modeling. I loved his basic point of machine learning is just our coping mechanism for the fact that we don't know the causal mechanisms. Sad song. I also loved Maricia's talk just now, where she reinforced Mark's point that facts do not speak for themselves. All data is subjective and biased, and it's the way that we represent it that determines how it's interpreted, and that's actually a big part of our job too. Now, I'm Marijn, managing data scientist at Capgemini, and I'm actually slightly very much intimidated by you all, because I'm not an engineer. I'm a social scientist, statistician, sociology, criminology. And years ago, my dad asked me, Marijn, what the heck are you going to do for a living? Same as many of your parents might have asked years ago. I was studying in Utrecht University, represent, yay, which is the most quantitative social science faculty in the country. So while my dad was wondering, is he going to talk about people's feelings? Yes, Dad, I studied Freud. I was actually modeling pandemics. This is my work on Ebola, 2014-15, my internship at Gyro 555. I was doing stupid Excel stuff back then, modeling the money spent on the islands in the Philippines after the Haiyan flood. And then suddenly Ebola happened, the world's biggest pandemic back then. Remember? Yeah, I know. So we started getting data from West Africa, what's the situation at, how it's spreading, and I was suddenly using models I learned during geography about spatial distributions, how it moves across regions, in SPSS and R. Yes, I like R, and I'm not afraid of admitting it. To model how it was spreading across West Africa. That's actually a visualization I made. It was used on the Dutch national news, so I took a picture of the television, sent it to my mom saying, here, look, show Dad, I'm actually doing stuff. Because I learned at that point in time that the shit we do with data can help save lives. Because we raised 10.6 million euros back then to send emergency aid to West Africa. And I realized that's all I want to do in life. And that's what the rest of this talk is going to be about, basically. So I graduated not on electoral outcome models, that was another one, but on crime prediction. Rotterdam, anyone? Rotterdam? Woo! Hey, good. So I live on the upper left over here. I made this for the police and for Abu Talib, spatial distribution of crime and what neighborhood level factors do and do not affect it over the years. Basically how many people get stabbed, where and why, and what you can potentially do about it. But this was 2016, so then I had an interview at Capgemini, and they said, wow, that's cool, that's data science, that's AI. And I said, uh-huh, because I needed a damn job. And that's how I became a data scientist. Any questions? Because back then it wasn't even data science, it was all big data, more on that later. But from there I progressed to modeling the yield for farmers in Kenya and India. Sometimes I talk about it on stages. And sometimes we test facial recognition algorithms to see whether you should paint yourself as a tiger or as David Bowie or as Braveheart to dodge facial recognition algorithms. Big hint, it's actually tigers. So if you plan to, do a hit, paint your face as a tiger, because the horizontal stripes make image recognition models mistake those stripes for eyebrows. And ever since COVID, most facial recognition models are overfitting on eyebrows and eyes. Okay, more on that later. Hands up, whoever worked with big data? Who is from the era when everything was big data? You old bastards, you dinosaurs. But let's be honest, the big data memes were pretty good. Back then we had dinosaur memes about big data, about how big data was going to solve every damn problem in the field. Because if dinosaurs had big data, they would have seen the meteorite coming and they could have, migrated or some shit. And they, basically had dinosaurs, had big data. They would have found a solution for sustainable life post-impact. The joke here is obviously that big data was not the answer to the problem. But back then, big data and Hadoop was the solution to every problem. Who here knows Hadoop? Who here still uses Hadoop? My point exactly. Because we've had a lot of buzzwords since, and as managing data scientist, it is part of my job to explain why no, this is a terrible idea. Because the first on the list back then, buzz, was big data. Basically anything too large to store on a single computer. But what was big data 10 years ago is now just damn data, because I have 4 terabytes in my closet, in my hallway. We used to require an entire cluster for it. Now I can run it on my laptop. Big data is dead. Long live big data. We had Internet of Things as an hype. Everything had to be connected, or as us Dutch like to say, Internet of Things. As one word, no spaces allowed. Try it. Because, oh yeah, it's great, it's going to solve everything. Machine learning is going to solve everything. No, it's just a coping mechanism, because we don't know the causal effects, says the statistician in me. Suddenly everything, cloud's going to fix everything, or GPUs and deep learning is going to solve everything. Let's remember for a moment that 2013, NVIDIA's Atlas GPU unleashed neural nets and deep learning upon the world, and we have that entire field thanks to video games. Because without video games, NVIDIA wouldn't have developed that GPU. I often remind my dad of this. And then suddenly in 16, 17, everything became an artificial intelligence thing. And I remember being told, Marijn, you're an AI expert, go talk to them. I'm like, well, why? You build machine learning, right? Yeah, I built 2 models and 1 works. Good, then you're an expert, go. That room was slightly smaller than this one. I was nervous. Then we had the whole low-code thing, because everyone started hiring data science teams who didn't produce shit, because it was 10 econometricians in one corner with data, and you expect magic to happen. Obviously mismanaged, because you need engineers, you need visualization, you need proper storytelling, all that. So those teams failed, and then all the organizations said, we hate data scientists, we want low-code platforms so we can just clicky and don't need them. And all those low-code platforms, some of which are great, started selling, yeah, you don't need data scientists if you just buy my damn tool. Of course, that also failed, but that was another hype. That was 2-3 years ago, but some are still stuck there. Blockchain is the biggest hype of all, if you ask me, because it's just a way to distribute your data without a central authority. So I don't get why financial institutions, central authorities, are so interested in a system meant to invalidate them, but that's not me. And now we have fucking metaverse. Dudes, what do we do with that? They keep asking me these questions. Yeah, can we do something with metaverse? And I'm like, here, I have this VR demo from 5 years ago. It's like, oh, wow, that's metaverse. Pro tip, anything VR these days is now meta, whatever. But this brings me to the core point that it's really all data. It was so 10 years ago, and it will still be 10 years in the future. I just don't know what buzzwords they'll be bothering us with at that point in time. I hope it's not quantum, I swear to God. But our job is pretty secure, because 10 years ago they didn't know how to use a fax machine or a copy machine, and they still don't. And entire generations have to die before the average person in society knows how a computer works. So we're good, we're good. But this brings me to my core point. Yes, this is the cover of Neuromancer. Anyone know the book? Technocentrism. The belief that technology has all the answers and will solve everything. And selective technocentrism, that is our current day and era whenever I open my LinkedIn feed. This new tech thing will solve our problems, just like big data would save the dinosaurs 10 years ago. And I'm disappointed because I like dinosaurs, but they're no longer here, so big data failed. Now, I can talk a little bit about the projects I and we, some of my colleagues over there, actually do. As data scientists, I can talk about how we predict burnouts based on HR data and what goes wrong, a lot. I can talk about outlier detection, how we use fraud systems to see who drives leased cars to Disneyland and says it's for business. More than you think, actually. There was also cases of people driving around at night, 11 at night, from home to a non-work-related location, and then back home at 3. which was probably our system picking up booty calls, or considering their age cheating, which is not okay, but I guess it's okay, but not if you say it's for business, because then you can get screwed in another way. Anyway, fraud detection algorithms or refugee crisis. The work on the upper right is my work for the Dutch government from years ago on flows of refugees in and out of the country. It was a time series model, it worked great. The purple line was my prediction, the pink line was the standard, that was just the Excel-based average of the last year. That was the prediction before I came in. And the red line is what really happened, and you can see the start of COVID. That's when all the models went to shit, because all the borders closed, and I only have data on the past, not of the future. Tough life, tough life. Could talk about what we're doing for farmers. I mentioned those earlier. I'm flying to India next week to model this. Did you know that half the food in the world is produced by smallholder farmers? Not super farms with tractors and drones. I saw a really cool drone here, by the way. But smallholder farmers with 2-3 hectares of land and a donkey. And we built a platform, a data platform. It's called Project Farm, because my company likes to talk about AI and whatever, but we can't show what we've done because we get an NDA on our heads if we do. So we built this stuff pro bono for farmers in India, Maharashtra, West Bengal, and in Kenya to help predict their yields, assess how much fertilizer they need to use, how much seeds they need, and a lot of that is very simple optimization. But those very simple models stuffed into an app help those farmers a great deal. And from that I learned that it's not about the most sophisticated or coolest deep learning model, it's about building a model that works and solves problems for people. We're doing the same for the World Food Programme, actually. We have like 5 to 10% of the world that does not meet nutritious needs, does not have access to the bare minimum for food. But almost 40% of the world does not have a healthy diet or does not have the financial means to access a healthy diet. Now, the World Food Programme for decades has run complex models on how to figure out how to optimize based on their pricing constraints, nutrition constraints, and environmental constraints, the cheapest way to feed as many people as possible in case, say, grain prices suddenly spike, like happened this summer. They calculate what is the cheapest way to import food to feed more people as nutritiously as possible. If they do that calculation better and faster, less people dead, which is a very scary thing, but also a very important thing. The main challenge, they're running it in Excel, and it takes them like a week. And we're helping them do it in minutes or hours. And those two motherfuckers right over there are helping me build it. So give it up to Max over there. Thank you, Max. And we're delivering the second MVP this December. The first one went online this summer. And the primary feedback at that point in time was that the dashboards weren't live yet. So the output of the entire model, now in a minute, was still Excel. And I was deeply ashamed, because I wanted to be fancy. I wanted to be cool and slick. I'm a consultant. And then Claudia told me, Marijn, it used to take us a week, now it's going to take us minutes. I don't give a damn that it's still in Excel. Which was my reality check. Dudes and dudettes, it's about the impact you make, not how fancy it looks. And lastly, we have great examples of AI being used by my friends nowadays to produce excellent art, fan art, yes. I mean, it's crazy, technology these days, you know. To give one slight example of the burnout model I just mentioned, where we use standard HR data, so when did somebody join, pay raises, promotions, responsibilities, to predict who is going to drop, either by leaving the company or because they have a burnout. And the data privacy officer was already loading the shotgun and pointing it at me, of course, because I was coming in saying, I want to know their gender, their ethnicity, and if you have it, their sexual orientation. Why do you need that? Well, otherwise I can't tell if my model is discriminating. Because privacy and transparency are mutually exclusive in this world. And of course, I was just running linear regression here. Because my goal was not to predict who was going to drop, but why. Because if I'm just saying who's going to drop and HR has the conversation, hey, computer says you're going to get a burnout, what do you think is going to happen? And I am profiling, so GDPR will lynch me. But if I use LIME models, some of you might recognize this, use Lime models to explain for each individual in my data set at what point and for what reasons they score high or low, like John over here, fake data, who scores is in the green about overtime, which is the most common reason for burnouts if you look at literature. But his environmental satisfaction and his job level put him at risk, so you should have a talk about that, and don't talk about overtime. Now, I was at the World Summit AI about 2 months ago in a panel with 5 experts on the Great Resignation. Who knows what the Great Resignation is? Good. It's just a bit, okay, for the youngsters less so, but the labor market is like really good. A lot of people are hustling, a lot of people are changing jobs, and that entire panel was talking about, yeah, we need to think about the digital citizen of the future, and we need to let them work from home and let them work abroad, and they need more pizza parties, and they need to have a foosball table. Because that's how you retain people. Well, I don't know about you, but in pretty much every data science project I start, Google Scholar is the first thing I hit up to see if people smarter than me already figured this out. So for this talk, I hit up Google Scholar again and figured out the three biggest predictors for people leaving are age, marriage, and time in service. Well, you're not going to influence those, right? Unless you give people a bonus for getting married, I guess. I'm not ready for that, by the way. But the 3 biggest predictors that you do have influence on, so their level in the organization, their training, their pay, and who's the manager, you can all influence, but you made KPIs saying you can't. So young Marijn years ago was presenting this model to a large organization who had a huge burnout and attrition problem. And I was explaining, well, in your particular case, it's actually 4 managers who are causing the majority of burnouts. Of course, those 4 were in the room. What do you think happened next? Yeah, I got yelled at. My model was bad, evil, and probably racist. And the whole project went to shit, basically. I learned a lot there about shooting the messenger, about how to tell your story, how not to tell your story. I think 2 of the managers got the boot in the end. But my entire point here is that these are big predictors of the issue, according to science and according to our data science. And pizza parties and ping pong tables really are not big predictors. But the only reason management talks about those is because they're not allowed to change the rest. And if management can't solve a problem in the short term, they don't talk about it. That's a social scientist again. Because this was my biggest shock when I entered the field. I don't know about you after graduating, that in science you're judged for your methods. My professor would terrorize me with, you didn't think of this, you didn't standardize that. Whereas in business, you're judged based on your outcomes, which is like the polar opposite, and nobody prepared me for it. Did they prepare you for that? No way. I see a lot of heads going like that. Okay. Me too. It's okay, bro. So instead, you get feedback like this. Yeah, but is it scalable? Yeah, but is it accurate? But is it biased? No model is unbiased. And no human is unbiased. That's why we need both data and people to control each other. But the people that ask these questions the most usually have the most to hide, because they're just coming up with excuses because they don't want more compliancy and they don't want people to have a second opinion, a data-based, data-driven opinion. So data science is just using methods from science to solve data problem. I'm sorry, Mark. I very much loved your talk, but I disagree. Data science is totally science, especially when I'm sitting across a business manager who only talks about, yeah, but is this going to influence my KPI? I still feel like a scientist at that point in time. And I'm not sure if Sun Tzu said this, come to think of it, but he should have. And this brings me to a very personal issue about data and truth. Who here knows of MH17? Okay, that's all the Dutchies at least. This was the time Marijn crashed Twitter back in 2014 in the big data era. Remember big data? Yeah, a lot of hands, big data. When we were geo-tracking that stuff, because I was already in the scene back then, and then the whole plane just disappeared. It got shot down over Ukraine. Years later, we figured out it was a Buk missile shot by Russian insurgents who did it, but at that point we didn't know. And Marijn had data, leaked data, recordings in Russian of people talking about, yeah, we shot down an airplane. But the EXIF data generated at the point of generation of the file, showed that the audio file was produced the day before the airplane got shot down on the 16th. Meaning, was the whole thing a setup? At that point in time, based on the data we had at that point in time, because we didn't standardize for time differences amongst other things, we thought we had evidence that the whole thing was fake. So I posted that on Twitter and went absolutely viral. It's still up there. Damn. That's when I quit Twitter. Admittingly, Twitter is now more fun than ever, but you get what I mean. That was the data we had at the time. That's what we believed at the time. That's what we based our actions on. And we should never judge people, I think, for acting based on the data they have, but we should judge them for not trying to get better data. So I have friends in Ukraine, and this shit is still happening even today. This was on the news this year at the NOS, Dutch National News, explaining about how many people in Ukraine identify as Russian, except the data they're displaying here has nothing to do with identifying. The data was who speaks Russian. And just like speaking and identifying is not the same as what you have over here and what you identify as, if we follow this style of reason, the Netherlands should totally annex Belgium, because half of the motherfucker speaks Dutch. Wait, actually, why shouldn't we? They've only been independent for 200 years. Wait, any Belgians in the room? Okay, let's go. So my point here is this is dangerous stuff. And this is in part just because there's no proper fact-checking or misinterpretation, known or unknown. But it's happening at scale, and it's happening today, and it has a very real impact in how people view very big things happening nowadays. Plus, the Dutch national news just isn't the best, you know. I have friends in Kiev, I have friends fighting on the front line right now, and based on their reports, it's not about identification either. This is about the weight of evidence. And just now we had a great talk about that. Somebody talked about with great explorative power comes great explanative responsibility. And I like that. Otherwise, we're stuck in a hyper-reality, as described by Baudrillard all those years ago, and everyone's seen The Matrix, where you have multiple points of data points, multiple views that don't exist, that are mutually exclusive, but you can't prove or disprove either. So you're living in multiple realities at the same time, which, when I talk to any 13-year-old, is pretty much the world we're living in today. And a lot of us call it fake news. I prefer to call it propaganda, because I studied that stuff, and it's nothing new. We've been doing that for well over 100 years. But it is the big part of my field, of our field, that I fell in love with, NLP, image recognition, social media analytics, that we don't even talk about that much. And saw none of the speakers about that. Slightly disappointed, but not disappointed in the speakers on their own, because I'm actually loving the stories. Mark already mentioned this. Yandex. Anyone know what Yandex and Moscow and taxis happened? Yeah, he talked about it this morning. Yandex, which is Russia's Google, got hacked. They do the Uber services over there. So Anonymous, because this was Anonymous back in action, started asking all the taxis in Moscow to come to Hotel Ukraine. The entire city was messed up for the entire day, because it was taxis everywhere. Hotel Ukraine, by the way, was founded by Stalin himself. So it sounds like we're living in real-life cyberpunk. And actually, I do believe the future is now. We're living in a real-life cyberpunk world. It's just a lot less goggles and outfits and a whole lot more scary, subversive stuff. Now, I don't have to explain to you guys what's happening in the eastern side of our country, but I am going to ask of you, who here has ever been on Tinder? Professionally? Okay. So I got the message from a friend saying, "Hey Marijn, in February, I'm going to talk to you less. I'm going to be offline more." How so? "Yeah, I'm moving to the front line." I'm like, "The front line? Are you Ukrainian?" He's like, "Yeah." I just called him Eastern European bastard. He called me Western European bastard. This is how we bonded and became friends online. So it turns out I knew people fighting on the front lines. I'm like, I'm shit with an AK-47. What the fuck am I going to do? So I went on Tinder, used a GPS spoof to pretend to be on the Russia-Ukraine border, grabbed some Instagram pictures, and pretended to be a hot blonde. I mean, I can pull that off, right? Right? I started using my old Dungeons and Dragons names. Nobody knew, nobody had to know. And then you start matching with people, soldiers, on that Russia-Ukraine border, because they handed in their phone when they crossed the border, but when they're still stuck over there in the cold, either bothering each other or bothering women, you match with Ivan or whatever, and Tinder tells you you're 10 kilometers away from the motherfucker. Okay, and then he starts sending you certain pictures that I shan't describe here any further. Ladies, suddenly I understand how terrible it is to date online. I get you now. I'm so sorry. I would like to apologize on behalf of all men. But the thing is, I was doing this with 50 other bros. I assume they're all bros. And he also matches with Ivan, but is 20 kilometers away. This is a dick. It is the world's smallest antelope. It resides in South Africa, and like 13-year-olds, it marks its territory with its tears. I know, it's adorable. So, because I don't want to say, pic out here because it's being recorded, I'm going to say dick pic, okay? Okay, so we have the Russia-Ukrainian border over here, and we are gathering data, and I get a dick pic. Damn. Huh. But another guy receives the same dick pic. So we match, you know? And we know where it's roughly coming from. Dick is over here. Okay, great. And we get another one from over here, another dick pic. Great. But if you do this for a few nights, you suddenly know where the distribution of dick pics lies, mainly in Belarus. Meaning you have intel on where the Russian reinforcements are hiding across the Russia-Ukraine border, which is very real intel for a modern conflict, achieved and gained through methods that scarred me for life. And then somebody asked me, Marijn, isn't this privacy? Shouldn't you worry about, GDPR? I'm like, well, first of all, this is not Europe yet. Secondly, they're most likely dead, so who cares? Yeah, so you can actually Google this, and you can try Pinder for yourself, which is my new favorite Python library, because goddamn, it allows you to connect to Tinder through API. You can look me up on Elle magazine, because they published an article about it, because I wanted to talk about the brave women helping out online. I'll take that as a compliment at this point. Because a joke, ladies and gentlemen, is that the world didn't change that much. Back in 2008, I was stuck in WikiLeaks. We were using text analytics, very basic text analytics, to figure out which part of Afghanistan was being shot up, because America said, we're fighting over here. We're using leaked documents and basic NLP to show, no, you're also fighting over there. To speak truth to power, to show through data what's happening and where the war crimes are at, and where Reuters journalists are being shot. And that stuff is still happening today. Except now it's in HD. We're still gathering data through open sources, through social media. We're looking at either these are strapped for parts MIGs, or they're actually fake MIGs. We're not sure, but we're using satellite imagery and automatic image recognition to analyze it. We get to see people looting. This video gamers, who here know Stalker, the game? Lead AI developer for Stalker 2, the sequel, in Kiev. I know people in his studio. You know what he told me? Marijn, I'm going to talk to you less. I'm going to get some inspiration on the front line. Now he's fighting. I haven't heard from him in 2 fucking months. I hope he's still alive. The mechanisms don't change, only the ways in which they manifest themselves. We still have data, we still have a ton of problems worldwide, and we can still use data to help people. And new technology is never the problem in that. Legacy is. I'm pretty sure Sun Tzu said this. I want to believe Sun Tzu said this. And the fake was always real. Fake news is nothing new. Propaganda is nothing new. We will always have data that is biased and misinformed and is trying to influence you and makes you think certain things. And that doesn't mean it's bad. This just means we need more data to battle it, rather than less. Just like you think this is the final slide, but this isn't even my final slide. I posted about this. This is Russian national news. It's great. I mean, it's an American swastika with the Ukraine flag and the feminism symbol and pretty much every religion and socialism there, which is pretty much everything evil. And I posted about it, and my post got shadow banned. Basically, nobody gets to see it. After half an hour, I only had 18 views, until I removed the words swastika and Islam from it, and then it started trending. Meaning pretty much database evidence that LinkedIn's algorithm is basically a control F of bad words, and then they block your shit. Good luck being an Islam professor. Here we're using data to address real bias, not in, oh, but what if AI evil, but social media censorship, which is the most realistic issue in AI bias I can give you right now, and we're not talking about it nearly as much as I would like to. Please do like and subscribe. We can never be right. I don't believe we can ever be right, but we can be slightly less wrong. And that's what we do as data scientists. Thank you. And Slava Ukraini. Now, questions?
So, we have one there.
Please don't tell me this was a coherent story.
No, it wasn't. And it's very hard to follow up on such a presentation. So I'm just going to ask a dry question, and maybe that'll make it easier for other people to think of one. So models. You use models to make decisions. What's, in your opinion, the limit of models? Where do you stop believing them, and how do you make decisions then?
I'm going to use the forecasting for migrants as an example, where I was using a ton of mixed models. I was using actually Boost model, random forest model, some deep learning methods, even a linear regression model. And I was making the trade-off in the end between, one, explainability and accuracy on the other hand. And that's when I first learned that it is not our job to build a model. Sorry, it's not your job to build a model. It's your job to pick the right model and the right methods, and that's why it's called data science. And in this case, the cutoff, there was barely an increase or gain in performance based on methods. So I went with the simplest model possible so I could explain to government employees what the heck was happening and what they needed to do. Because if they don't understand your model, they don't believe your model, they're not going to act on it, then you're just talking to a wall. So I think it was an Einstein quote, but I'm not sure. Always use the simplest explanation possible, but no more simple than that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Don't be shy. He's here for us to answer.
Otherwise, I can ask a question. You talked about propaganda, and you showed some of the projects, and the last one you had was, let's say, art. But there's also, of course, I mean, you showed the fun side of that, but there's also a dark side with these models, like deep fakes and picture generation, that at some point, very soon, we're getting to an age where you don't know if something's real that you see. Is there anything that we can do about it, or is that just an inevitability that we're just going to not believe the news anymore?
At one end, I believe we need to have better regulation, better constraints about this, better fact-checking, also from a journalism side of view. On the other side, I think it's an immaturity thing for us as a society. When did you all learn how to type? When you were 18, 20, when you were 12? More like 12, thank you. generations before us learned to type when they were 30 or 40, or they said, oh, I don't need to learn to type or use a computer. My work is way too valuable for that. Those bastards have all been automated away by now. My point here is that learning to use a computer, learning to type, and even using math and statistics, I dreaded learning statistics, and that's why I mentioned math, and people go like, oh, on average. But applying it is fun and not as hard as learning it. And we, as a society, have to become more mature in using data and taking stuff online as objective truth. But that takes decades. In the same way, I'm going to use a terrible example. One of my favorite German writers pointed out that after World War II, Germany didn't think, oh, we've been the bad guys all along. No, they thought they felt as a society that they were the victim. Sorry, I'm a sociologist, here I go. They thought they had been bombed and defeated and everything was terrible. They felt they were the victims. And it took them 20 years for the societal, the societal point of view to shift into, oh yeah, we were the baddies. Why? Because 2 generations had to die. Which brings me back to this issue. Part of it is temporary because new technology is never the problem, legacy is. Thank you.
All right. Give a round of applause to Marijn.